Between the end of the Roman Republic and the middle of the Principate, the standard length of service for Roman legionaries went from 16 years to 25. Standard rewards for honorable discharge were the granting of a military diploma, which would have granted Roman citizenship if the soldier had been an auxiliary, but which also enabled the discharged soldier to receive a pension from the Aeraria Militare, the Roman state's military treasury, and Roman veterans clubs and organizations would also now help the retired soldier if he was in need of something. Soldiers also received land, probably the most well-known reward for long-term military service. The granting of land is something which really begins to show up towards the middle of the late Republic, so comparatively late in Roman history, and how much land a soldier received was based upon their rank, function in the military, their service record, and sometimes the whims of their commander. The granting of land was done, in part, via a process known as centuriation, which doesn't refer to the centurion type of soldier so much as it just refers to the Roman field system and their method of surveying and dividing up land. And, oftentimes, those veterans were established in veterans' colonies across the empire. But being a soldier is a dangerous job, as any veteran watching this video today knows. So how likely was it that a soldier would reach the age of retirement? Well, the short answer is that it's not certain. Doing anything with ancient demography or population statistics is difficult for a number of reasons, but let's go over what we can actually determine. One of our best and one of our most numerous sources for this topic are tombstones and epitaphs left by soldiers or by the veterans organizations. We have a problem here though, because these tombstones and epitaphs have a tendency to round the numbers to the nearest multiple of 5. So for example, at the time I'm recording this video, I am 3 months shy of 28, so the Romans, if I was a soldier, would just round that to 30. But in any case, these epitaphs usually tell us the age of death and how long the soldier served, and subtracting the years of service from the age of death can give us the age of recruitment. It's a rough method and likely needs some refinement, but if we do that, we are left usually with the years 18 to 22 for the general recruitment of troops in the Republic in the early to high Empire. Okay, so now what about mortality rates? This is the big question. Our data is actually skewed favorably towards the Republic rather than the Principate here, but even there it's difficult to work with in some regards. Walter Scheidel, one of the major historians of the Roman Empire currently working today, and one of the leading demographers of the Roman Empire, has attempted to tackle this question. Working from the research of Nathaniel Rosenstein, a military historian of the Roman Republic, it's estimated that for most of the 2nd century BC, the death rate for soldiers was about 8.8%, but Scheidel notes that that's only for documented battles. If we factor in troops we know were not on the field, then that drops to about 3%, but it still varies depending on whether or not the engagement was a defeat or a victory. And Scheidel admits that even this calculation is not great, but given the paucity of data, it's what we have to work with. We don't know much about the Principate in this regard, but using a similar method and tweaking it in places to account for more or less information, Scheidel arrives at a soldier's odds of being in combat between the range of Augustus and Marcus Aurelius as being 1 in 12, looking only at the major conflicts of the period, the Dacian War, the Jewish Wars, etc. Death rates in battle for these conflicts are tentatively estimated at maybe 10 to 20%, but even this is problematic because we have records of entire units being wiped out and not others, and some units would not have seen much combat if any at all, so the data is not necessarily uniform here. The health of the army has been argued by some to have been a more immediate problem in terms of a soldier actually reaching the age of retirement. The Romans are famous for their sanitation works, aqueducts, baths, things like that, and although ancient cities were still disgusting by modern standards, Romans took their health seriously, and so did the Roman soldiers. Their permanent camps had baths and latrines, and we know from surviving military manuals that their field camps were often situated near water, and that latrines were dug away from sleeping and cooking quarters, and that soldiers were fit. The major issue does not appear to have been diseases like smallpox or plague, things which only appear to really show up in any force in the primary sources during sieges, but even these were comparatively rare in the warfare of the Principate when compared to actual battles. Of course, when sieges did occur, there were outbreaks of plague. The Plague of Galen, more famously known as the Antonine Plague, is believed to have broken out when the Romans were laying siege to a city along the Tigris, and which then came back with the soldiers. It's much more likely, and the sources attest to this, but at the same time they're somewhat vague, that things like malaria, dysentery, typhoid, and food poisoning posed much more of a risk. Marriage was also something that Roman soldiers did, whether legal or not, although it is eventually totally legalized. Working with this also poses problems. We have more marriage commemorations coming from wives than we do from husbands, while the exact opposite is true in the case of civilians. Now, it's entirely possible that this was the way it was to get around the initial ban on marriages, but it's also possible due to the fact that many soldiers would have moved around a lot, or maybe women were in short supply depending on the area. Whatever the case, even prior to the formal legalization of marriage under Septimius Severus, Claudius granted soldiers the rights of married men, and Nero apparently turned a blind eye to relations in many instances, with veterans having their own rights extended to their families at the time of discharge, which makes sense if they acquire a family later, but the nature of these laws strongly suggests that in many instances people knew what was going on and just chose to ignore it. So based on that, marriage demographics, deaths from combat, and deaths from illness or accident, to the extent that we know any of this for certain, and there are areas for further research and improvement, what exactly are we looking at? Well, Scheidel, Rosenstein, and several other military historians estimate that overall death rates for troops during the late Republic and the early to high Imperial periods is maybe something like 20 to 25 to 30%. Of course, this changes depending on whether or not there's a major war, but for much of the period that we're talking about here, Roman soldiers appear to have had a reasonably high chance, certainly more than a 50% chance in many cases, of reaching retirement age, and all of the benefits that that would have brought. We're looking at the production of 5,000 to 7,000 veterans a year on average, with a replacement rate being estimated at a bit more than that 5,000 to 7,000 discharge rate per year. Further research is of course needed, and if and when that research is produced, it will of course warrant another video. But until then, this is what we largely have in terms of an answer to the question of the survival rate of the Roman military during the late Republic and the early to high Empire.